welcome to One Book, readers discussing one book in their lives. Tonight, late night in Izmir, and you're in my former home, Southern California, Annie. So I think it's like mid-afternoon, early afternoon. Nice
Hmm.
December afternoon. It's been
Yep.
raining all day here. It's nice. But tonight we're going to talk about, it's the best, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, published in 1843. And I'm joined by Annie Freshwater, author, educator. Recent publication of her novel, uh, Rune Jake, and we'll link below to people can pick it out either print or I think it's digital version, right, as well, Annie? Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, it makes a good Christmas gift, right? Good Christmas reading.
It'll put you in the spirit.
Yeah, yeah, especially
The spirit of 2020.
yeah. The horror fantasy Christmas present. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
It may be a kind of a light. Everything now seems horror fantasy. So yours may be more light than you thought it would be when you were writing before 2020.
Agreed. No, absolutely. It's definitely the season for all things dark and dreary.
Yes, exactly. Well, thanks again for coming on to talk about this. And our plan to talk about this arose during the Halloween tree discussion we had when we talked about the knocker on the doorstep of that quote
Yes.
unquote haunted house with Jacob Marley knocker, and now we encounter it again. So
Yes.
we started the Halloween tree was the harvest holiday, and now we're into the solstice. So
Yes.
thank you for bookending that whole process as we move and descend and hope for the return of the light. Let me just
Thank you for
start off.
inviting me.
Let me just start off by saying, just reading a little of the preface that's to the book, not the whole thing. But what's amazing about this book that obviously with the title's very dominant, and you think of Christmas, and of course, and there's been a Muppet Christmas Carol. There's multiple movies. There's
Oh
audiobooks.
yeah.
There's plays. In fact, they do. I don't know if they do it every year, but for a while they were doing a stage performance in Sleepy Hollow, which I thought would be pretty amazing. You got to put that on your bucket list.
Yes.
Watching a performance of Christmas Carol in Sleepy Hollow would be amazing. But he talks about it. He says, "I have endeavored in this ghostly little book." That's how he writes in the preface about this novel, this ghostly little book. And he says, "May it haunt your houses pleasantly as you read it." And it certainly has haunted my house. And it was
Yes.
even a more of a severe kind of haunting this time around. So thank you so much for reading it. But let's just jump in wherever ever you want about your reading of this book.
I actually love jumping in. I love to jump in right there where he talks about may this book haunt you pleasantly. And at
Mm-hmm.
another point in the novel, he says, "I am in spirit at your elbow, telling this story."
Yes.
And throughout the entire novel, I love how present, as the author and the narrator Dickens is. It feels like a story that I read it this morning, sitting in bed having coffee with my daughter snuggled next to me, and it feels like a story that somebody from your not long ago past is sitting
Yes.
there sharing with you. It invites you in, and the Halloween tree has a
Mm-hmm.
similar feel to it, where you could picture sitting around with people you love, sitting around a fire, hearing these stories. With the Halloween tree, there's this delicious sense of fear and wonderment, right?
Right.
And with this, usually when you're reading A Christmas Carol, there is that sense of joy and redemption. Reading it this time, even though it's the same text, it's that same narrator, it's got this feeling of almost colorlessness and hopelessness because of the season that we're in. It could I grew up with this story. I grew up watching Mickey Mouse Christmas Carol.
Oh yeah.
I showed the Muppet version to my daughter. We used to every year in Orange County go see a live version of it, and it's a story that really shaped my perception of the holidays. You know, what does Christmas mean? What does it
Mm-hmm.
mean to have and to have not? What does it mean to, mankind is my business? What does it mean to connect with our fellow humans? All of that, right?
Yeah.
And then reading it this year, when we're not connecting, when we're not celebrating in the ways that we have in the past, it was a little bit dreary. It was a little bit sad of a read.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the saddest things about this time, it's usually, I read it every year as part of
Yeah.
a kind of a ritual, but you always can relate to the incredible sense of joy and gathering and laughter. But this year,
Yes.
when you're reading it, you're thinking about, the gatherings you won't have. I mean, I don't know,
Yes, exactly.
and that added a strange dimension to it. And but just the notion of, I mean, Dickens is seen as one of this book in particular is one of the kind of creators in the sense of the modern Christmas. I just
Yes.
love that it's a ghost story. That's how he referred
Yes.
to it as. It's a ghost story, and it starts
Yes.
with death, literally,
Yes.
right? Talks about it has that great parody. What do you say? Jacob Marley is dead. I mean, dead as a doornail, as dead as can be. And then right away he has a reference to Hamlet's father.
Yes.
It's like, well, if Hamlet's father wouldn't have died, we couldn't have encountered him. He couldn't have run into the ghost. So it's just incredible to take this idea of something that's become the archetypal Christmas story and start it from a place of just darkness. Well, that's how it replicates or connects us to the actual season in the sense
Yes.
of we're moving toward the ancient celebration of hopefully the return of the light. So,
Yes.
it's right there at death, and it's very intense, that beginning.
No, it is. And the presence of death throughout the novel is very intense. It
Yeah,
is
literally.
ultimately even it is ultimately a joyful book, right? It's a book. It is ultimately a story of redemption, and we see by the end, Scrooge goes from one of the most dislikable characters I think ever in literature to an immense and wonderful person. And we see throughout, though, it is haunted by death. Tiny Tim's death, Scrooge's death, that he witnesses,
Mm-hmm.
and Marley's death. And it gives us that hope, much like the Halloween tree does, that
Yes.
even when there is death, there is that return to that light, to the light. There is the
Mm-hmm.
promise of Scrooge mentions multiple times. I hope to be reborn. I
Right.
hope to come out of this life into this new life. I will, and he's looking for himself in when he's visited by the ghosts of Christmas future. He's constantly looking for himself in the streets to see what he has become.
Yeah.
There's this hope for Scrooge throughout it of what will I be next. I've lived this life. I'm penitent. I see the error of my ways, and I'm moving forward into what I will be next. And I think that's kind of a place that a lot of us are right now, right? And we are reflecting on past Christmases for better or for worse.
Yeah.
We're in the moment of the present that isn't what we expected. And now we're hopeful for what comes next. We're hopeful for the lessons we may take away from this. And hopefully they will be good lessons that we're able to act on and move forward, much like Scrooge, into a new life.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. I mean, it's an underworld story,
Yeah.
reflective of, I mean, what's physically happening with the sun, but also reflecting of those great underworld stories that that all transformative literature, visionary literature, kind of contains. And he takes this underworld story, but the reading of it, especially this year, was much. It's a ritual ceremony for the reader.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean
Yes.
ceremony like maybe just a pageantry, but actually undergoing something, and you can really walk through that and experience those same phases, which we'll talk about as he encounters himself and the different spirits who visit them, and he sees different parts of his life. And it's not an intellectual or a kind of even ethical transformation. It's an experiential transformation. So it's something he goes through. He is reborn like the sun that is
Yes.
reborn in the solstice time. And in reading it, as you either think about it later or as you're reading it, you're doubling because you're going through his journey, which is what kind of the great transformative literature does. But you are reflecting of, like you mentioned, uh, your Christmas past, and that's such a meaning of the spirit of Christmas, looking back at the year and the year ahead. I mean, he does it over multiple years, going all the way back to his
Yes.
childhood. But it really is a great text and I mean, there's great um, representations of this novel. I think of Bill Murray. Didn't he do one called Scrooge?
Yes,
I
he
think, yeah.
did.
And
Yes.
George C. Scott played an amazing Scrooge, and
Mm-hmm.
it's tempting for I think people to like kind of get it in another way, but sitting down on with that text is really
Yeah.
a journey and an encounter that offers the reader the transformation. Maybe
Yes,
not as intense that that Scrooge goes through. So it's experiential. Yeah.
when you watch it, and I mean, again, I've grown up watching different versions, as
Mm-hmm.
have many of us, and it's very enjoyable. I mean, my daughter loves Mickey's Christmas Carol and the Muppet version, and eventually I'm
Yeah.
sure she'll love the Bill Murray version. But when you are watching it, you are absorbed in the character's transformation. It's more about them and
Yes.
what you're seeing on stage,
Yes.
right? When you are reading it, you realize that it is this ritual of self-reflection.
Yeah.
There are spirits, and the spirits that Dickens creates are quite terrifying. When we
Yes.
see the ghost of Christmas past, and he has this light coming out of his head, and he's constantly changing his form. Now he has 20 legs, now he's got multiple heads, now no heads. And you see Scrooge crush him down, and the light keeps going even as his body
Mm-hmm.
collapses. It's terrifying, like objectively terrifying.
Yeah.
But what he's actually going through is really just self reflection.
Mm-hmm.
He's seeing himself as a child, and he remembers everything. It's not, oh, I had forgotten this. He remembers the
Right.
names of people. He
Right.
remembers the feelings that he had. He tells the spirit, I've seen enough. I need to forget this.
Right.
But throughout the whole thing, it's always his own journey that he's seen. Halloween Tree is different to not to continue to reference it, but in the Halloween Tree, the boys are seeing the rituals of other cultures, how they celebrate the dead, how they honor, that season of life. Here, it's not about what other cultures do. It's simply about how this man has lived. But the themes are so universal that we're then forced to turn that reflection upon
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. Again, Marley says, my business was mankind. And any of us could say that, whatever our business is, whether we're teachers or writers or bank tellers, anything that we're doing, ultimately we are connected to one another. And I think that's what makes this particularly important to read during the holiday season, because it
Yeah.
asks us to reflect on our choices. It gives us hope for what comes next. And it is asking us pretty directly to change.
Yeah. And not just and remember isn't passive for
Yes.
Scrooge. He encounters. It's
Yeah.
experiential. So he sees. I mean, through the intercession of these spirits, which is also very interesting because it talks about this knowledge from, I don't know, the Aboriginal dream time, or
Yeah.
from the angels, or from the higher self. This other way of knowing that often
Mm-hmm.
we have separated from ourselves in the
Mm-hmm.
modern world. You think of like Jung talking about how we've lost the ability to connect to these other ways of knowing. We either
Yeah.
don't believe in them, or forgot them, or don't know how to do them, or think it's all just foolishness. So the emphasis is often on information and a
Mm-hmm.
kind of passive knowledge or facts. But it wasn't enough for him to remember. He had to experience these memories. And as you said, there's times where he encounters the spirits. He says, we have to leave. I can't take anymore.
Yeah.
Please, I don't want to see this anymore. But let's go to Jacob Marley, because
Yes.
he's the door knocker, and he's his partner that had died 7 years ago on Christmas Eve, the day the book is set. And he comes home and he sees his face in the knocker. And it's like, when you tell somebody, it sounds it's an incredible feat in terms of the narrative, because stuff that is out of control, it's almost like magical realism. I mean, I know I'm
Mm-hmm.
mixing genres and mixing decades and centuries, but the stuff feels normal, and even his
Yeah.
reactions are normal. And so he looks and he sees Jacob Marley's face in the door knocker, and then he's visited by him later, and that description is just seared into you. You almost don't even need anything else, but of course there's dialogue that follows. But what he's covered with, the chains and the cash boxes, and he has keys and ledgers, and he's kind of, his face is covered, and he doesn't believe. He thinks he's not a spirit, thinks he's not there, and he unwraps his face, and his jaw comes down, and he has that. He says to, what do you want with me? Finally, and there's just a one word answer. And this is, again, we ask ourselves that. There's a great John Lennon song, like, um, uh, it's the Christmas song, So This Is Christmas. And
Yeah.
it's a question and a statement, and asking of the listener. And the answer Marley, the spirit, gives him, and when he says, what do you want from me? What do you want of me? He says much.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And
Yeah.
and he's the one who's going to announce the journey of what's
Yep.
coming.
And what's so interesting with Marley is we never see him. He isn't redeemed. This is his
No.
fate. He will forever. And reading it this time, I was struck by that. I think
Yes.
because this whole situation feels like it's going to be endless, right? And with
Yes.
Marley, he comes and he says, "This is my fate. I have sat by you many times when you couldn't see me, and I will wander the earth, unable to help anyone. But through my procurement, I have gotten you a chance."
Yes. Yes. It's
And that is so.
heroic.
That is,
It's
yes,
heroic. It's heroic.
it's true. Yeah, it's truly heroic. He has come, through the spirit world. He has somehow manifested
Mm-hmm.
himself in the flesh as much as he can to come to Scrooge and to warn him. You are going to be just like me. Your chain 7 years ago was as long as mine, and now it's much longer and much heavier still.
You're
You
right.
will be visited by these spirits. Somehow Marley has, I don't know if he's curried their favor or what he's done to procure this chance for him, to get him to be visited by these three spirits of Christmas. And Marley is this, he is a terrifying figure, the way that he
Mm-hmm.
appears. And the fact that Scrooge is still denying him, even as he's speaking to him, I've always thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
Scrooge
Yeah.
is usually, when you're faced with something, seeing is believing. And Scrooge says to him, "You could be just a bit of undigested beef. I'm going to
Right. Right.
swallow this toothpick.
Right.
I'm going to swallow this toothpick, and I'll see gremlins and
Yeah.
goblins."
he says to him.
He's not.
He says to him, "I think you could be more gravy than grave."
Yes,
I ate a
yes.
meal that didn't agree with me. Of
And he's still so in possession of himself at that moment,
course.
still very much dismissive. And it's not until Marley undoes his jaw and then Scrooge is terrified of him, and he sits looking down at the floor with his hands in his pockets, just saying, and he still has that fear on him, even when the Ghost of Christmas Past arrives. But that fear we see begin to transform as he starts to go
Yeah.
on this
Yeah.
experiential journey, as he starts to see himself as a child.
Yeah.
And my takeaway from that is that, as he's seeing the true horrors of what life can be, sadness, rejection, avarice, the wrong regret,
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden these spirits are no longer frightening. Death in and of itself isn't even as frightening as the feelings that Scrooge has had heretofore from his own choices.
Yeah.
By the time the spirit of Christmas present arrives, he's ready to face it. He's kind of got his guard up. He pulls the bed
Yeah.
curtains aside. He wants to face whatever's coming, right?
Well,
And he
well,
says,
well. He thinks he does.
yes,
He thinks he
until
does.
he sees it.
He thinks he does because he is not yet in the true underground ceremony. He's not broken. He's not
Yes,
stripped down and reassembled. It's almost alchemical how he's
yes,
broken down and rebuilt in a way. But you're right. The lines that Marley has, and it doesn't take long to read. I think it was about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and
yeah,
it's just that dialogue you have, not only that you're witnessing, but you're having with Dickens, who, by the way, this project started out as, he called it his hammer. He wanted to write a hammer to kind of wake the world to the incessant injustice of everything from child workers and poverty and no health care, and this was what emerged, and it's a hammer to all of us in a larger sense as we review our lives. And it's incredible that this came out. I mean, it's visionary
yeah,
that this came out. And he has those lines where he's talking about, these are the chains I forged in life. I wear the chains I forged in life. And the incessant torture of remorse, which this is where the book got really darker for me this year. I think in a normal year, we always can look back and think I should have done this, but this
yeah,
year we've been really separated from so
yeah,
much and from so many that took on a really dark tone, as we are also prepared for this journey that'll go through our past and our now and our future. But so for me personally, being kind of separated from so many, and that incessant torture of remorse. And then he has a line where he's talking about, um, there's no amount of regret, no space, not enough regret that can make amends for life's opportunities missed. And
yeah,
this is where, in a normal reading, it takes a much darker turn, because we all have that feeling now,
yeah,
right?
absolutely,
With
absolutely.
opportunities missed, either what we didn't say to somebody, or the last time we traveled, or what we haven't done, or what we should have done. all that's amplified right now because of where we find ourselves in December 2020.
Agreed. And when you see that Marley, I mean, Marley was sort of in self-isolation himself, right? He says
Yes,
he walked with his eyes down and he never left the
yes,
counting house. And
yes,
we have that feeling of why would you not leave the counting house if you had the ability to go out and to be among human beings? And
yeah,
when Scrooge is standing with Marley looking out the window and he sees all of the other shades. And
yes,
there's one who Scrooge knew quite well. It was a
yeah,
large safe on his ankle, and he's crying because he can't help a woman and her baby who are sitting in a doorway.
yes, yes.
And you
Oh,
see these people who walk amongst the living and are unable to touch them, to speak to them, to connect with
yes,
them.
yeah,
We almost resonate with the shades at that moment, that
yeah,
feeling of disconnection and isolation.
yeah. And that witnessing that we're doomed. They're doomed. These spirits are doomed to witness what they ignored or what they missed in life, and now they can't do anything. And that, there's a old book. I think it's from the '70s. Notes to Myself, Hugh
Mm-hmm.
Prather, and it became pretty famous. Poetry book, but it was really notes to myself. And he has a line I still remember. I think everyone remembers it after reading it, and it's something like, um, "I walk by another, and we both have our eyes down." So
Yeah.
and Marley talks about that too. Why did I walk by?
Mm-hmm.
And why did I walk through these crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down? And that's
Yeah.
us every day. And this is where the book really starts to read you back and brings you into this. It starts to strip you down too. And I notice that much more now, probably because
Yeah.
we're kind of a mess.
No, agreed, agreed. And it was helpful at the same time, even as it felt much darker this time. And it took me a while of sitting with it to reflect on how this is going to sound odd, but how relatively easy Scrooge's transformation comes about. The spirits, we don't, most of us don't encounter the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future
Mm-hmm.
to, show us our own death and shake
Mm-hmm.
us to wakefulness. But we have this idea of if we can sit with ourselves long enough and really reflect on our choices, on how we have come to where we are, on how much regret we have already stacked up, what chains we've forged,
Yeah.
and what do we want to do with that moving forward. Scrooge goes from being miserable and so disconnected to we see him as a ghost when he's with the spirit of Christmas present at his nephew's party, and he's so excited. They can't hear him, but he's
Right.
shouting the answer. He's
Right.
joyful, and when his nephew makes that speech about him,
Right.
here's to good old
Right.
Uncle Scrooge,
Right.
he wants to give a speech in return thanking him. Like he is already, just by being back in the world, even as a spirit, he wants to join in the world. Just by having this moment of seeing his childhood self and taking compassion on his childhood self, of
Oh,
taking compassion on the family of one of his workers, we see what a marvelous change is brought in him. And I think that if we ourselves can be open to that self reflection, to healing our trauma, to reviewing what we regret rather than kind of turning from that darker side of ourselves, we can also heal. It's painful. What Scrooge goes through is very painful.
right.
But that death of the self, and yes, it's only in Christmas Future's vision. It's not what's actually come to pass, but he experiences his own death. He
Yeah.
sees his
Yeah.
body beneath the sheet.
Yeah.
He sees his gravestone. He sees people selling his
Yeah.
bedclothes, right?
Yeah.
And so,
But he but
as
he
we
also but he also does die.
yes,
The Scrooge that he was on Christmas Eve does die. You know what I mean?
exactly,
So it's
exactly.
yeah, but like with the when he sees himself, the boy, he says a beautiful line where he says it's the boy reading by himself, a lonely boy
Mm-hmm.
reading by himself by a feeble fire, and
Yeah,
uh, and then it's almost unreadable. Annie, the encounter, he has multiple encounters with his past, and
yeah,
you don't. They're not things that probably with him he hasn't thought about them. So, but they're not just thoughts rolling like on the screen of his mind.
no,
These are brought to life, and he has to
yes,
encounter them, like you said.
is to
Whether
live
we
them.
right and see them in a vibrant way that he hadn't seen them before. And when he's talking with Belle,
Oh,
and Belle says, "You've replaced me with another idol."
a
And he's
golden
like,
one.
"Yeah." And he's like, "What? What are you talking about?" She's like, "A golden one." And he's such a genius with language, and she talks about, I will let you out of our agreement. And she doesn't say it because it's the right thing to do, or I don't want to be miserable or whatever. She says, I'll let you out of the agreement for the love of the person that you once were.
Yeah.
and and he so when he sees that, it's almost one of the times where he can't watch anymore, and he can't participate. He can't be
Yeah.
there, and and then he ends up seeing her life with a full house and joy
And
and
happiness.
family, and he becomes multiple times he hears stories about him, right? In the Cratchit's house, he's referred to as the ogre of the house.
Yes.
So when they start telling the story, everything kind of, you know, all the joy around the table kind of falls
For a full
away.
5 minutes, it's
Yeah,
gone.
yeah, like no one has anything to say. And then similarly with Bell's family, when he talks about I ran into your uncle, then there's stories about how he reacted with Marley being sick and even
Mm-hmm.
Marley's passing, and him having to hear them and see the people saying that.
Yeah.
It, it's it draws it into this stripping down. I mean,
Yeah.
he's being stripped down.
And it makes him reflect on his present choices, as he
Right.
sees his young self. He reflects, and he sees Tiny Tim, and he reflects, oh, there was a boy at the door singing a Christmas carol through the lock. I wish I had given him something before
Yeah.
sending him away.
They do appear.
We
Yeah.
Yes, we see these moments where from each encounter, he pauses and he sits with his regret.
Yeah.
He doesn't
Yeah.
turn from it. There are moments that he has to turn from, like you said,
Yeah.
when he sees
Yeah.
Belle. I cannot watch more of this. And he
Yeah.
has this moment though when he sees her with her daughter, and the
Yes.
daughter's leaning against her father, and he thinks, I could have had a daughter much like her, just as fair and as full of potential,
Yes.
leaning on me, and it breaks him. But
Yes.
he then, by sitting with that regret, he doesn't become bitter.
No.
The version of Scrooge that we've seen dies, and we see him
Yeah.
emerge into this better version.
Yeah.
Maybe a different version than he would
Yeah.
have been if he hadn't made these choices to begin with,
Yeah.
but a better version nonetheless.
Yeah. It's just like the son, right? The son dies to be born new.
Yes.
Yes. And
Yes,
and
exactly.
and and the yeah, I just keep thinking of that that the exchanges he has with people really bring him. I mean, he's being stripped down, but some of his most beautiful moments is you can track his. He says, "Oh, I should have. I do. I was just thinking about something. I was just thinking about,
Yes.
and it was something from that day, that Christmas Eve
Yes.
day, and
Yes.
he doesn't have time to take it apart yet because he's not ready. But they're beautiful, soft moments in the narrative, which, as you said, can be pretty terrifying. And another part that was hard to read. Remember the amazing description about the ghost of Christmas Present when he first encounters him? He's like this green figure. I think he's in a dark green.
White fur trimmed
Yeah,
robe.
yeah. He's like the Green Man, and he's just
I want the
complete.
robe.
Yeah, he's completely surrounded by abundance, and even in the narrative, it lists all the chestnuts and
Yes.
holly and ivy, mistletoe,
Yes.
a blazing fire, just abundance everywhere. And right away, like for me, what struck me is almost this Zen way. That is the present. It's not a
Yes.
lesson he's learned yet, but and I think it's hard for us to think now because our present circumstances are hard. Days seem the same. We're missing so much, maybe, about what we usually do at this time. And it's the perfect invocation of what every moment is,
Well, we
depending
see
on our participation in that moment.
our participation and our perspective, because we see that stark contrast of the abundance that the Ghost of Christmas Present presents, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of that description is one of my favorite
Yeah.
descriptions of everything that's there. There's another one that echoes it at the end of the book when Scrooge is out walking and he's seeing just the candies and the fish and the
Yeah.
nuts and
Yeah.
everything around it. So, I mean, it puts you in the Christmas spirit,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But then we go to the Cratchit's house and we see nobody says the pudding was too small. We're
Right.
such a large family. And when
Right.
there's one atom of meat left on the goose's bones, Mrs. Cratchit says, "Oh, and we still have leftovers." And it was all supplemented well enough by all of the other dishes that they had made, right? And so we see this large family marveling over what they have when we're
Yes.
able to see
Yes.
it's not enough. The
Yeah.
goose is not that big.
Right.
The pudding is quite small, but everyone is so grateful to be in this moment, participating, experiencing. Their perspective on it gives them that joy.
Yeah.
And we see Scrooge with everything that he has doesn't have that joy.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting because it shows you all the different walks of life. It shows you the fezziwigs, it shows you the nephew, it shows you Scrooge, and how people relate to what they have is what determines their abundance and their joy in that moment and their Christmas spirit.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I'm so glad you brought up that kind of bookend between the kind of physically abundant description of uh, the physically abundant description of the Ghost of Christmas Present, but it was just the joyful abundance, as you mentioned, at the Cratchit house.
Yes.
And that's what I mean about the gift of the present, because
Yes.
it can be, you know, every moment is something we're lucky to have and to celebrate if we haven't been hardened to it or forged our own chains.
And so much of this holiday requires that shift in perspective, doesn't it? You know, rather than focusing on the regret.
Yeah, and it's not even that it necessarily requires it, but it also, I mean, it does that, but it also helps us create it. It helps us see it. You know, like, so whether it's the decorations or the rituals our family have, I mean, it's giving us tools that are reminding us, just like the kind of symbols and the literal presence, well, I guess spiritual presence of all the holly and the ivy and the mistletoe that was around this ancient green man figure that shows up in the present. And I love what Fred says. He talks about inviting Scrooge, and of course he like laughed at him and said, when he invited him earlier in the novel in Christmas Eve, he's like, no, of course I'm not going to go to your dinner for Christmas. And he's saying, you know, Fred doesn't understand it. It's beautiful. And he says something about like, well, I'm sure the companionship would be at least as interesting as his own thoughts. And when he says that, he has no idea the journey that Scrooge is on, but boy, that proves to be true. And so much, we're like, companionship is so much richer than our thoughts, which are often revolved around, you know, prosaic, or, I mean, even traumatic or deadening, or, you know, keeping us away from life. You know? And that's that urge to, you know, participate through companionship, through dialogue, through what a dinner is. And I mean, if people haven't read it, sometimes people won't read it because they think it's too Christian, and it's been written about as a Christian allegory, but a lot of the symbolism is going through this more ancient journey, right? Christ does signify the return of the good, but even his story was laid on top of this ancient story that all cultures celebrate, of the return of the light, and which is the good in everything in life. And yeah, go ahead.
No, he even at one point, Christmas Present sort of argues with him and says, well, you know, this is how people have people have done things in my name that I wouldn't actually condone. And so really there is this stance in there, it feels, of this is not about the way the religion is handling the holiday, or about the way organizations approach the holiday. It's more about getting back to the true meaning of connection, of rebirth, of the return of the light, and the fact that comes from that ancient green man figure. Yes, it's very much saying we should be focusing on that more ancient approach versus, you know, looking at the overly religious or Christianized aspects of the book or of the holidays. And really, there is that focus on the connection of mankind to mankind versus mankind to some higher power. That's what's prized here. Although Scrooge is given access to the supernatural, and through this spiritual encounter, they're spirits, so therefore it's a spiritual encounter. But at the end of it, it's not, oh, and now I've seen the glory of God. It's, no, now I've seen the glory of man.
Yeah, well, and I love that you brought that up. That was beautifully said, because at the beginning it sets up these two oppositions in the book, where Scrooge, I think when Fred is inviting him to dinner, talks about, you know, the world is full of fools.
Yes.
And Fred said something like, well, it's a time, this is a time. He doesn't make a pronouncement about man one way or the other, or, you know, mankind, I should say, and humankind. But he says it's a time to open the heart to connect.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
those are these oppositions. And of course now we move, but just to get back to the present. So yeah, the connection in others, but it's also, I don't know. I'm sure everyone is experiencing this around the world that I talk to is a depression, whether it's from the uncertainty or the repetitiveness of the days, or just being tired. We're not exercising as well, whatever we're going through, and it's the connection to the present moment, in a Zen way, for lack of a better word, that is so came through so powerfully in what the Ghost of Christmas Present offers.
Yes.
That understanding. You see it first, I guess literally, you see it in the sense of all of the abundance around him and even his attitude. It's very interesting compared to the other two spirits, of course. And then you see it in these connections you're talking about, where it's the joy of just being around family and Tiny Tim, and things in themselves that sometimes get this crust, or this crust of the prosaic, or become chore-like.
Yes.
Kind of. So even those things that maybe are around us all the time, we have now the chance to re-see by understanding the present. Because to be honest, I mean, right now, the great gift is we're very lucky just to be talking.
Oh, absolutely.
Right now about this. Yeah.
And I think we see something that we can take from that with the fact that the Spirit of Christmas Present only lives for one day.
Yeah.
He lives so fully in that moment, and there's no regret when he's talking to Scrooge about, I only live for the one day. His hair is turning gray, and he has visited the entire world with his Christmas cheer sharing of himself. And he says, what is that you're seasoning their dishes with? I am seasoning it with myself. He has given himself so fully to the present, and he's going to die. And there's no sense of regret or longing for a past or longing for a future. It is simply living in that moment and being grateful for what one has in that moment. And that's difficult to do. It's a difficult thing to master, especially at the holidays, where there is a lot of yearning, especially this holiday. And I think that leads us into the abject terror of Christmas future that we see here, right?
Yes, and another a deeper connection to Mound Shroud, of course. Because they're described very similar, except Mound Shroud, you get to actually see them, but the description again, Dickens is so good. He can come up with these just amazing names, right? Like Fezziwig, right? But his descriptions, it's such a master. It's a master craftsman. And his description of him just being blacker than black, and all these folds, and you can't even see a face, and of course it seems to be like death, but the deep black garment that concealed the head, the face, any form, nothing visible, and he's the Christmas of yet to come. That's a beautiful paragraphs.
Yes, and that's so interesting, the way that he is very frightening. Just this hand, there's so much horror in that pointing hand.
There's the finger again, right? From Mound Shroud and Halloween Tree.
And no speech. And yet this is still Christmas. I've always been interested in that. The fact that it's still Christmas. It's not, and here is death. It's Christmas future. It's Christmas yet to come. And even in this dark place of unknowing, this is still Christmas. We are still here in that moment looking for joy, even when things are blacker than black.
And I think, like, even as good as some of the representations are, whether you hear a dramatized kind of dramatic version that's recorded or a film, there's nothing like reading The Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come on the page. It's so intimate, and it can't be captured.
No, I agree.
It's so that moment where he keeps pointing him. He's at he's by a corpse who he doesn't want to see the face of, and he keeps walking eventually to a courtyard, a graveyard, and the finger just keeps pointing, and he won't say anything, and he keeps pointing. And this is where writing can be more powerful than cinema. Because you're inside this character after all this time. You've seen what he's gone through, and then that's also pointing to me where all our names are on that headstone.
Yes. And the way that he interacts with this spirit. I'm thankful for your lessons. Teach me.
Yeah.
To the first spirit. I can't fly. I'm gonna fall out the window. Where are you taking me?
Yeah, but but this ghost is not impressed.
No, he's not.
He gives them nothing. He's like, don't try it. I was like, just I'm done. I'm not even.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because it's not something. It's not something he can. It's not something he can like intellectualize, and that's what he's doing until the final lesson. Because he even says, "I will not shut out the lessons they teach." What does he say? Like, are these the things that will be, or maybe? It's amazing, right? So he's thinking his way through it, but that's not enough. It's not enough to say, okay, go. This is where I think it's an amazing ritual where the hero is stripped down and reassembled.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
The cycle, and that's all of our stories in these time in any times of our lives become transformative, and it's not enough that he intellectualized, because it's beautiful what you said. He gets it in some level, but he hasn't yet seen it. He hasn't yet lived it by seeing that gravestone.
Exactly, and we see he tries to intellectualize. He at one point in the beginning, he's trying to intellectualize Marley, right? He's saying, "Well, wait a minute, X, Y, Z," trying to get his mind around it. And here we see him doing that as he's listening to people, and he's thinking, "This is trivial. Why is the spirit having me listen to these things about this person who died? But I'm going to go ahead and absorb every word. I'm going to be on this. I want to be better. I want to change." So he's accepted in his mind, "I want to change. I'm going to be reborn from this. I will be better." But it's not until that moment where he realizes this is his death. This is and Tiny Tim is dead, and everything has gone the way I don't want it to go. That's when the change really takes root. So it's showing us that although yes, seeing is believing, believing is seen. And I know that's sort of a trite thing to say, right? But it's not until it takes root in his heart that he's actually able to learn these lessons and change. He's saying before the spirit even arrives, "Oh, I'm going to be better. I'm going to do better."
Yeah.
But only when he feels that impact does he actually change.
Yeah. And then it's like, I mean, it almost reminded me of those stories of like the medieval executioner, like the walk to the gallows.
Yes.
Right. And probably, you read encounters or you read accounts where some are heroic, some are crying, but it had this sense of pleading. So he did understand, but also, that fear that it may be too late, but also that fear of he's just saying it because he thinks it's too late. He doesn't really yet understand. And then that image, you think of like the iconic connection, the iconic dialogue relationship in the Orthodox Church, where it's so important to see the icon. And that icon is his grave, and it's a relationship in that moment that he has to learn from, in a way. And he's been prepared all this, and then I really think that sometimes maybe the book is, because it's become such a part of Christmas. At least I have the feeling now. I know it was a little more terrifying this time for me, and I don't think. I just saw it differently, I think, because of the circumstances right now. But I think because it's so present, we sometimes miss it. Right?
Agreed.
It's almost become, I don't want to say too commercial, because that's not it. It's still a beautiful book and a beautiful story. But sometimes it's become a little, I don't know, crusted over because we think we know it.
Yeah.
And this time was really a time to clear the eyes and the heart, and really, I really appreciated reading it this time, but it was a little more terrifying. And I think sometimes we forget that when we watch it. The Muppet one's awesome. I love it. So we think of it as the story, and this kind of is our intellectualizing of it, right? Oh, the Christmas Carol's about the story. 3 says, and then he changes. But that's not the ritual. That's not the ceremony that he has to go through, and that the reader goes through, and that we should go through at this time. And anyways, I'm rambling. Go ahead.
No. You said a few times about how it's experiential, and I think that's part of what made this read different. When we have been coming from a place of abundance in past Christmases. No problem to hop on a plane and go see family. No problem to walk outside and see a million Christmas decorations. Now we're not coming from that place of abundance, so we are having an experience that is so different than what we're used to with holiday. Whether our traditions have been impacted in big ways or small ways, there is a different atmosphere in the air than there usually is during the holiday season. Yeah. And I think when you are experiencing that and you're already in this sort of low place where you're not distracted by the glitter and the season, when you read this, then it's almost like if you read it out of season. You know, you would see this isn't the story of Scrooge. This is the story of any of us who are being asked to look at our choices, look hard at our choices, look hard at our regrets, and say, do I want this self to die, to be reborn, or do I want to live with the chain that I forged? And this is the first holiday that I can really think of that I have been able to sit with that in a different way than in past holidays when there's been so much abundance to distract. And this holiday season, there isn't much.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's this this therapeutic aspect that is taken on new meaning of the book reading you back, because so much of the holiday season, that's beautiful. It's a beautiful distraction, and it goes so quick, and our eyes are blinded by lights and love and presence and family and plans, and a lot of that is really in a different place right now. And I think one of the what I love about the fact that he started with a ghost story, calling it a ghost story in the preface. And then so he's, if I remember correctly, he falls at the ghost of Christmas Yet to Come's like feet, and he's like trying to grab him, right?
Yes.
and then he wakes up, and there's a beautiful line. He's like the whole image of this terrifying, silent, black figure, and it dwindles down to a bedpost.
Yes.
And he's clinging onto his bedpost. And they make that, and one of the, and again, it's what I love about Ghost Story, because it's not a 400-page novel. That's not its point. It's it works more like a parable, right? Or a ghost story, where it's very memorable, very vivid, very powerful. And right away he starts thinking, when he starts shouting, what day is it? He doesn't know how long he's been asleep. And he doesn't know if he thinks it's a dream, but he's like, no, they were here because they've left marks. Yes. So that kind of leaves it in this, whenever you have this transformative experience, someone may try to explain it away. Oh, that was just, even afterwards, not only at the beginning, afterwards he could have woke up and said, oh, thank God that was just a dream.
Exactly.
Now I go back to work, but he doesn't, and he starts shouting, and there's that dialogue with the boy. The boy returns. He's like, what? He doesn't know what day it is. It's Christmas, and he says the thing that he says. He's like, the narrator says, is the time before him was his own to make amends in.
Yes,
and that's true every moment, to ourselves, to our past, to each other, and just to this appreciation of every moment that I think is only becoming more clear now. I mean, we miss everything. Agreed. So this is such a beautiful ending realization that's the return. His understanding of time, and not in just a linear sense, but in the moment. That he has the moments.
Well, and he says the spirits have done it all in one night. And just this idea that we could face so much in this small space and then reclaim everything that comes next, rather than living with that chain and that regret the way that Marley will forever. He's able, through the course of this one night, rather than writing it off like you said he could have, he's able to then claim that time that lies ahead of him, and to live in the way that is authentic to what he wants to have. He says it way, or the narrator says at one point, some people laugh at the changes in him.
Oh yeah, they thought he was like crazy.
even Bob Cranston wanted at one point to fetch a straitjacket for him.
Yeah.
You're going to give me a raise? What's happening here?
Yeah.
But he becomes this wonderful person, and he doesn't care if people don't understand. He doesn't care if people judge him by his past. He is now different, and I think there's a lot of hope for everyone in that. The idea that now at any point you can reclaim the time ahead of you. You can change your life dramatically or in small ways, and you don't have to worry about what came before you. If you want to make those changes, you can be a Scrooge renewed.
Yeah, and that's what's so beautiful about the transformation, because it's on I don't want to say small scale, kind of spiritually or morally, but it's the actions are small, and that's what shows the transformation. His joy at interacting with that boy,
Yes. Yes.
His joy at just writing the note to send the turkey to the Cratchit family,
Yes.
and him
Thank you.
him imagining, what it'll be like, and then the description of the family, of Fred's family, when he goes over there, and
Yes.
they're kind of looking at him like it's a miracle to them that he's even there. And the description, I think, of his Fred's wife is just completely like stunned that he's there, and he enjoys even that. So it's not this kind of plan to do
Yeah.
it. It's being born into the world again, and being alive to every moment, and that's getting hard. That's hard right now for a lot of people, whether because we're mediated through devices, we're not seeing people, and that's what it was really a big lesson when you emerge from the ceremony that is the reading of this book.
Yeah, finding joy in the mundane. He's looking into kitchens and
Well,
he's
and there's no mundane anymore, right?
exactly.
Yeah, it's like
Yes.
a child.
Yes.
Yeah,
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 and to try to it's a childlike sense of wonder, right? Like my daughter
right,
just turned 6, and
right.
for her, when we were out the other day looking at Christmas decorations, whether it was a small garland on a shop store or a 60-foot Christmas tree, she was so delighted
Yeah,
to see the holiday transformations. Everything is joyous, and to try to look through those eyes again, we see Scrooge doing that, right? He's peering into the kitchens, he's looking at all of the decorations, he's speaking with everybody who goes past him.
right.
And what's fascinating about that is when he does go to Fred's, when he goes to his nephews, even the awkwardness is joyful.
Yes,
You
yes,
don't see him afraid of what they're going to say
yes.
or thinking, oh, I should
Judgmental.
turn back.
Yep, he's not judgmental. He's not ashamed. He's not fearful. And
Exactly.
I love that you use the word delight, because it's a word we don't use enough, but we do often use it describing how kids are relating to decorations, or the holiday season, and he is full of delight and joy in the moment. And to be honest, that's been hard these times.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The joy and delight. So it's not this kind of theoretical, okay, he's back with a family gathering. That's not enough, because we can be in the family gathering right now and be worse than he was at the start of the book. But it's that finding delight in that moment. And you see that so much in the book. It's like what Fred said way back, that was his opposition to, the world full of fools, which he was one. That's what's funny about that quote, right? And Fred's like, so he talks about opening heart, to each other, but he means like to yourself and to this joy of being alive, and what every moment brings. And these are things that we may say over and over, but to really take deep and engage and participate in, like he does. That's that joy. It's not just a word. It's not just a concept. It's a relating to the moments, not just the people. And that great line at the end when he says, "Well, before we go, I'll see if we'll close with this line." But any other thoughts about maybe anything you haven't covered? Maybe about how you read it this time, or how you emerged from the reading ceremony different this time? Anything else you'd like to say?
I really enjoyed it this time, just for the way it made me reflect on Christmas past, Christmas present, and what I want to do with Christmas yet to come. And that was a unique experience, because having grown up, see every year my entire family would go and see it at the on stage. Every
Really?
year.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah. No, every year, and it was a fantastic performance. It was something we always look forward to, and I remember when we stopped going to it when I was a teenager, and Christmas felt very different. It was a tradition that I had grown up with, that I was used to, and I think it was around the time my grandmother passed that we stopped going. And so
Wow.
there was a lot of ending of tradition there, and then forming new traditions, and that's something that, I mean, it's been almost 2 decades since I've seen that on stage, and yet it's something that still defines so much of my holiday season.
Right.
So reflecting on the way that traditions are mutable, we kind of think of them sometimes, I think, as immutable. It's not Christmas if we don't have XYZ. It's not Christmas without this play. It's not Christmas if we don't get to sit on Santa's lap this year. And I think that having that moment of seeing how our traditions can change, and it's still Christmas, it's still the holiday season because of what we make of it. So this year, has been very different, obviously, for all of us. And for me as a mother, I've had to put aside what my feelings are about that so that I could create a sense of holiday joy and wonderment for my child, because I don't want her to have that gap of my 6-year-old Christmas was really bleak, right? I don't want her Christmas to be like Scrooge's was at the schoolhouse.
Right.
And to rediscover the ways that we can find joy in the moment. This really made me reflect. I was glad to read it before the holiday season. I mean, it's the holiday season, but a couple of weeks before Christmas. Well, there is still time to work on new traditions, to build gingerbread houses, to realize that we can create a Christmas in our hearts that reflects Christmas past and that prepares us then for Christmas yet to come.
Yeah, and it's like even our things that start as, I mean, rituals can become routines.
Yes.
Yeah, and so even whether it's setting up the tree, for example, and this year was maybe harder to do it, and maybe it's kind of, it's our eyes get crusted over, or our hearts get a little crusted over, and reading this book, what I took was really that the recognition of time, and the moment, and I'm curious about, with all of the times you saw it on stage. What I don't want to say what difference. That sounds kind of stupid. One's reading and your own personal experience, and one's watching it. But I guess since you had been reflecting on all those times of thinking it and watching it in a dramatic way, even with good actors and a good production, what did you appreciate then returning to this individual initiation of a text that you knew well, but now you're walking the steps through the author and going through this ritual passage?
A big part of it is Dickens' language. He has such joy in his language, and that's so important to the idea of joy in the moment. When in that opening page, when he's talking about he's dead as a doornail, he says, "Well, I would think about a coffin nail as being much more representative of death, but we'll go with dead as a doornail." And there's so many moments where he just delights in the descriptions of, whether it's a positive description, like of all of the Christmas goodies that are set out, all of the wonderful foods and sights and smells, or it's something awful, the shades as they're mourning that they can't help people, the children that follow Christmas present, want in ignorance. Those are the descriptions there are so visceral and wonderful that his word choices really paint a picture that is so different than anything you can do visually. Even seeing Scrooge himself, and when I would see it, it was always the same Scrooge. It was always the same actor every year, and he was a wonderful Scrooge. But to see Scrooge's thought process and the way he's interacting with these things through Dickens' language, it brings you to a different understanding of Scrooge and of the story and of Dickens as a writer. But it also forces you to reflect inward differently, because when you're watching it, you're there for entertainment. Oh, we're going to see, there was this one moment where the actor playing Scrooge would do and he was an older gentleman. He'd do a somersault onto the bed to put his top hat on at the end. And before he would go out to get the turkey, and it was and it was wonderful to see him do that. And every year, everybody would be so excited to see him do it, and we would all come. So you were there to be entertained in large part. The things you were expecting, and they did this different in the production this time. So you came to it with an idea of this is tradition, this is ritual, and I'm here for the entertainment aspect. When you're reading it, it's. And I remember even reading it back in college feeling this way. It's less about I am being entertained and more on I am being taken on a solemn journey. I am party to something very sober, very serious in this man's life. This isn't fun. This is life and death, literally. This is your entire eternity laid before you, Scrooge. What are you going to do with it? And the book forces you to see that, whereas the production, whether it's the play I've seen or the movies, it can be comical to see what this old kind of awful old guy is going through. And instead it becomes very personal and human.
Yeah.
Much different experience of self-reflection. And one of the things that I have to call that you pointed out, the description of Christmas yet to come here versus what you see on stage. The stage version, it was somebody up on stilts, black cloth, no face, terrifying. But reading something that you cannot picture in that way, it's much more frightening than this version.
Yeah, and it's our story. That great language at the end where he says, no matter what happened, it was always said of Scrooge that he knew how to keep Christmas well.
Yes.
And he says something like, may the same be said for all of us, as if
Yes.
that's and in some sense, we love those people in our lives who just embrace Christmas and bring us to do things. My mom was like that. But when you think deeper about the book, about opening your understanding to time and to the present, I mean, that's really profound when then you can say you keep Christmas well, because it is that window. And from your study of, I know you're an astrologer, and that time of when the sun's return, it's very ancient, sacred, and that's why it's celebrated. And it's not the same, and there's other things going on in the world in, let's say, I don't know, July, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so it's this time to really engage in this experiential understanding of the kind of revivification, because it's of the present, of our understanding of the present. As we're tired from the year, we're all beaten down. And it's like, and we get it revivify our understanding of what a gift every moment is.
Yes,
It's really profound, and that's hard. That would be hard to. You can understand it and be entertained by it through watching it and admire a lot about things, but you can't take the journey's not yours, but it is our journey in reading it.
It is. Well, and you can be so dazzled when you're seeing it on stage or in a movie. You can be so dazzled by the production and the emotion and all of it that when you leave, you're filled up in a different way. But when you're reading it, you might be dazzled by, as you should be, by Dickens' wording and his word choices and his descriptions and all of that. But it's a different. It's not distracting. It forces you to reflect rather than to be distracted.
Yeah, and there's nowhere to hide when there's nowhere to hide when the bony finger keeps pointing him onward with no words.
Yes, exactly. Well, we're going with him rather than watching him.
Yeah, I think we barely got started, but I want to thank you for making this part of my holiday celebration this year, and the conversation has really helped me understand more about the experience of reading it, and has awakened. I just love that moment. It's awakened holding the bedpost.
Yes,
because he is awakened.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
As are we.
Yeah, and was it just a dream? We don't know. But happy holidays to you and your family. Congratulations again on the book, Rune Jake, which is available now. It's exciting that, it's been hard to do much during this year, but I really admire that you got through it, final draft, and it's out and it's in the world now. And maybe, hopefully, we can have you back in 2021 just to talk about the writing of that book. That would be interesting.
I'd love that. Thank you so much for having me.